just trying to calm down the North, that's not realistic. The only thing that's going to keep slavery out of the territories are laws that put that into place. Okay? So all of these events after, question 2 on here, why is the spirit of compromise destroyed? It's all of those events that we covered under that. Okay? So when they actually tried to implement the Kansas and Nebraska Act, they're focusing on the southern part of it, which winds up being Kansas. Okay? And there's a whole bunch of different votes that occur there. First, they have to figure out the territorial delegate to send to Congress. This one doesn't matter as much, but so many people have flooded into Kansas, and so many people specifically have come from Missouri, that the vote winds up being pro-slavery. Even though the majority of the people there don't want slavery.
This is like the bleeding Kansas.
This is like when they start to vote, and eventually it leads to bleeding Kansas. Okay? The more significant election is when they actually try to figure out the legislature that's going to be in Kansas. That means these people are the ones that make the laws. Okay? Same thing again. You have border ruffians that come in from Missouri, and they wind up voting in a pro-slavery legislature. Okay? Now remember, they start passing these crazy laws that are the most strict in the entire nation. Okay? Things like you can be, put to death if you help a fugitive slave escape. You can be put into jail if you even speak out against slavery. Okay? So they really take it to an extreme. Meanwhile, you have a bunch of people that don't believe this is legitimate. Okay? So they wind up forming an anti-slavery government, having their own elections, and that takes place in Topeka. Okay? So the result is now you have two governments in Kansas. The result of that, and the problem with this, is the federal government is split. Okay? You have the Democrats and you have the president who believe that this should be legitimate. Okay, right? They even get rid of the the governor who's begging for him to say that it was an illegitimate election. And you wind up, right, just with Kansas having to deal with two different governments. Right? Make sense so far? Yes.
Uh-huh.
What was the capital for the slavery?
This is Lecompton. Right, that's why it's called the Lecompton Constitution later on. Okay? So from here, you have the two governments, and people basically start to get fed up. And this is where bleeding Kansas and all of that starts to happen. Okay? So it starts off with the sack of Lawrence. Okay? Then you have John Brown. I cannot spell that off the top. Potawatomi. Okay.
I just looked Eagle Creek. MIE.
So that happens, and now that John Brown has killed 5 people, all this violence comes from there, right? And that leads to bleeding Kansas.
Wait, Lecompton was with which government?
Under Buchanan.
No, but it was like which government?
That hasn't happened yet.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is like, yeah, the Lecompton Constitution hasn't happened yet. But that's the pro-slavery capital. Okay?
Did someone spell Potawatomi? Just
It's probably up there. Yeah, it's right there.
Potawatomi. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So, meanwhile, the other thing that happens because of this is bleeding south. Right? And that doesn't happen because of bleeding Kansas. That happens because Congress basically is arguing over which is the legitimate government, and Andrew Butler can't handle that. And Preston Brooks can't handle that. We wind up with right? Okay, so in between, we'll come back to the political parties after, okay? But next we have the presidential election of 1856, okay? And here we have our new Republican Party, which is going to run Fremont, okay? You might remember him from the last unit. He's the guy who went to California and took over California with the Bear Flag Revolt. Okay? You have the American Party, which is the Know Nothing, and they run Fillmore. And then you have the Democrats who run with Buchanan. So Buchanan was picked because even though he's a northerner, he's a lot more sympathetic to the South than the other candidates. He also was out of the country for the Kansas-Nebraska Act, so people in the South like it. Right? They also convince a lot of people that the Republicans want to mix races, and that the slaves are going to be freed, and that all of the whites are going to lose their jobs, and it scares enough people that Buchanan winds up winning. Okay? Buchanan's also running for the only national party that's left. Right? This was our big political party. The Whigs are gone, Republicans are new, the American Party doesn't appeal to that many people. Yeah. The Free Soilers at this point are already absorbed into Republicans. Okay? So when Buchanan wins, he's very weak. He basically knows he won because the South voted him in. So he doesn't really stand up to them until Fort Sumter later on. Okay? Other than that, he kind of just becomes their yes man, doing whatever they want. And it's in this environment that we have our last two issues that destroy that spirit of compromise. We have the Lecompton Constitution, which finishes up our whole Kansas issue, and we have the Dred Scott decision, which is even worse. It makes everything horrible. Okay? So the Lecompton Constitution, what happened is there was about to be another vote, right, because enough years have gone by. There was going to be another vote for the next territorial legislature. So in order to ensure that slavery stayed, okay, because they didn't think they could do another fraudulent vote, Lecompton, which is the pro-slavery capital, they create a pro-slavery constitution called the Lecompton Constitution. Okay? They get the people to vote on it. All these free soilers and the anti-slavery government, they completely ignore it. They say this fraudulently voted government made this. We don't even want to vote on it. Okay? So it winds up passing. A couple of months go by, there's the new legislature that's voted in. They, of course, are going to be against the Lecompton. So now you have two different votes and the same issue. It's sent to the national government. Buchanan and the Democrats are going to support it. But then you have, of course, the Republicans and the Northerners, and even people like Stephen Douglas. All right? Stephen Douglas is upset because it's not real popular sovereignty. So they're split on it. They wind up finally coming to a compromise. Right? They deny it. Right? The Lecompton Constitution is no more. It's sent back to Kansas, and Kansas, of course, denies it, because they're all free soilers there. Okay? So we wind up with Kansas just stays a territory all the way up to the Civil War. Okay? The Dred Scott decision is made completely by Southerners in the Supreme Court, right? And it's very significant. Right? First of all, it says that blacks are not citizens, both free and slave. And they take it a step further. They're basically trying to solve all of this issue over westward expansion and slavery. Okay? And what is the decision that's made?
The Missouri Compromise is on the Constitution.
Okay? The federal government cannot control slavery out west. Right? They have an obligation to protect property because of the Fifth Amendment. So because of that, they have to respect Southerners that want to bring their property into the territories. Right? It doesn't apply to the different states. It just is saying in the territories, which are run by the federal government, they're not allowed to stop people from bringing their slaves. Right? So that makes the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. Right? And it really is also against popular sovereignty as well. Right? But mostly things like the Missouri Compromise. What do the Kansas-Nebraska Act and Dred Scott have in common? So Kansas, Nebraska have popular sovereignty.
Both extent slavery.
Okay, they both wind up doing that. That is true. You guys said it before. Both of them say what's unconstitutional.
Missouri
Missouri Compromise. Okay. Well, this one said that, right, it replaces the Missouri Compromise. It said popular sovereignty. And this just says altogether, making that decision it was going to be free was unconstitutional. Okay. That's all that. Alright, you guys want me to do political parties?
Whatever.
Alright, I'll do a little bit. Okay. So, at the start, before Kansas Act. Okay, so before the Kansas-Nebraska Act is passed, we have the Whigs are still around, the Democrats are there, Free Soilers have formed, though they're a very weak party, and you have the Know Nothing Party that is formed already. Okay? So as soon as the Kansas-Nebraska Act has passed, the Whigs are gone. Okay, remember the Whigs were having other problems before this, but Kansas-Nebraska, they are no more. Okay? So now the Whigs need a place to go. And you have a lot of northern Whigs that join the Free Soilers. You also have a lot of northern Whigs that are going to go to the Know Nothing. Okay? And in extreme cases, you might even have them go to the Democrats. But remember, those parties were still opposite, so they don't normally want to go there. Okay? The Southerners, though, have less of a choice. They could go to the Know Nothings. Okay? They could go to the Democrats. Okay? But most of them kind of wind up here because they don't like the Democrats yet, and there's really no other party that is formed for them.
They go where?
They mostly either go to the Democrats or to the Know Nothing. It's one of the two. They don't really have that much of a set. The Southerners.
This is the thing that we did the political part,
The graph. So the Northerners really are going to the Republicans, right?
Northern Whigs, right?
Yeah. The Republicans are made up of Free Soilers, former Northern Whigs, okay? And basically it's a Northern party. Nobody from the South is joining the Republicans. The Republicans formed because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in opposition to that. And they grow because of bleeding Kansas and bleeding South. Okay. The South, you're really just going to see the South is either going to join the Democrats, more and more join the Democrats because there's no other party for them. But you'll also see that they are in the American Party or the Know Nothings.
Who was at the head of the Know Nothing?
They have, the one candidate they wind up running is Fillmore, but their main thing is immigration. And once immigration starts to kind of drop down, they also lose kind of the point of their party. So once we have bleeding Kansas and bleeding Sumner, okay, a lot of Northerners from the American Party are now convinced that slave power is more important or more of a threat than what? Hope. So you also wind up, after these two events, you wind up with Know Nothings